I'd like to ask you to use the 6 month of retail advice for Atlantic Crossing, which is planned for downtown Delray.
All right.
The Edwards Group, are you consulting with them already?
No, I'm not consulting with anybody in the area at all, but I'd be happy to review it or send me plans or whatever won't get me sued. I'll give you good advice. But I'm very happy. I'm very sincere. I just gave a presentation in Fargo, North Dakota, and I've been getting daily store owners to sending me pictures. We're commenting. We're going back and forth, and frankly, saving them a lot of money. They were getting a lot of bad advice to do things that were expensive, and they weren't going to help their stores. So I'm very happy to do it. I travel 200 days a year, and it gives me something to do at night to not be so lonely. So I appreciate it. Yes.
Robert, it's nice to see you back here. I guess it was about 4 years ago.
Thank you.
I enjoyed your talk then. I just want to clarify one thing that you said about parking. I'm a parking expert. I've spent 25 years studying it, and I was on the buying team for smart meters. The smart meters that the city of Delray Beach is getting are license plate recognition. You're going to have an app. If you choose to put an app in there, you don't even have to get out of your car.
Wow.
They have, you know, we interviewed 6 different companies. You can see, you could read everything. It's
That's
advanced.
great. I hadn't heard of those.
No, I mean, they are wonderful. The other thing is, being a merchant myself, I said, what are you going to do to help the merchants and the restaurateurs? And they have so many things that will do it, including you can, if you come into the store, you spend money there, or you have the restaurant, you can put a code in and get free
that's
parking
great.
for an hour or whatever.
I hadn't heard of that. That's brilliant.
And the other thing is, let's say you're going to do a benefit, and you put an ad in the paper, and maybe a radio or TV, and you put a code. Put the code in, and you get an hour or 2 hours free parking. Well, they track that, and they can show you newspaper didn't work. The radio did, or the TV. So you
That's
have.
great.
It is so sophisticated, and of course it's because Europe is where they really developed it because they needed it, and
I didn't know that.
No, it's super. Check that out.
I will.
It's you can talk to our. Well, in fact, we just got the meters. They should be installed.
Okay.
In the parking lots on the beach.
I like what Donald Sloop says about meters. He says that if you do put in meters, all of the revenue should go to the Downtown Business Association
Yes.
for beautification
Well, that's what
and
we're
for
working
marketing.
for. No,
And
that's what
I
we're
do
working
think that's
for.
really smart. In Michigan, there's a small city called Petoskey, Michigan, way in the north. And their DDA has a $400,000 a year budget. It's totally funded by the parking meters.
Sure.
And your
This-
budget, I think, is $750,000 roughly, what I read. Could you imagine if you had another $400,000 from the
No,
parking meters?
this will do the
Then
same
you could
thing.
hire out-of-town consultants. I mean, what could be better than
Right.
that?
Well, and then the other thing is, why should the taxpayers have to pay
Yeah.
for the garage, the maintenance, all this? The
So,
user's going to
it's
pay for it.
complicated. I do like the balance of park in front of the store and pay, or be able to park a block or two away for free for the first hour or two. In my town, we did that. We went for 2 hours free in the garages. I'm from Birmingham, Michigan. We went 2 hours free in the garages and expensive meters. And by making the garages free for 2 hours, their revenue went up $1 million the first year. Because people who never parked in garages used them because they were free, and then they realized they weren't that bad. So it's very, I have a whole chapter on parking. You know more about parking than I do, but probably that resident that's parking in that Jeep and all of his buddies are probably so artificially lowering your retail potential here and frustrating your shoppers. Okay, anyone else? Yes.
How you doing?
Good.
Yes. Again? Okay. I would like to have your opinion about what is happening right now. Maybe you know the area, Las Olas area, which is a street, a commercial street that, by what you're saying, is pretty much the future of what we can expect of the shopping experience of the customers. Here on Delray, we saw that the BCBG store closed, so the Subculture Coffee, I think, because of the rent close. We saw Las Olas, the market, what I call the popcorn, start closing all over the place. And for many years right now, Las Olas doesn't seem to be able to get over that kind of popcorn factor, that closing effect. And it seems like if, yes, they are expecting the major to come, because it seems like if they're going to be the new malls, and the majors are not coming. Do you believe that there's anything to learn there? Because obviously the Las Olas Corporation are keeping their prices very high because they believe in that business model. Are they making a mistake, or is it what we are supposed to expect, a transition?
I don't know. I'd like to research that. But my big point here is that you are one of the top 10 or 20 cities in the United States for a city of your size. There's no question about that. Tomorrow I'm being interviewed by the USA Today to list the top 10 cities in the U.S., and I'll mention Delray. But you need to be deliberate in what your future is. If 50 nationals are going to leave the mall and come here, do you want that? Do you want more restaurants? Do you want all independence? You need to set the dial where you want to be so that I think your choices are broad. But I'd like you to be deliberate in what you are. Do you want to be like San Francisco and keep the nationals out? You need to think about it, and you need to find out what your options are. What are the market options? And then pick from those market options. In my little town in Birmingham, we're 20,000 people. We have 3 million square feet of commercial. And we decided no nationals, and we hired a Top Gun broker who goes out and finds the best local retailers and brings them into our downtown, or handpicks the nationals. We just got an Allen Edmonds men's shoe store, for example. So you can do that. You could hire a business recruitment person if you had a market study, and you could go out and just handpick the best retailers that are not nationals. But you should, I think, as a DDA and as a community, you should find out what your options are, pick one, and then go after it. Do you want just to service tourists? Are you happy with just being a tourist market for snowbirds? Find out what you can be and go after and do it. I think your options are really broad here. You have some of the best. You have the X factor. You have the urbanism of a great place. And why not figure out what you want to be and become it? You may just say we want to keep the status quo, which is fine too. Yes. Pedestrian-only centers don't usually work in the U.S. because we don't have the density and the mass transit. There were 275 built pedestrian malls in the U.S., and only 6 worked, and the other 260 failed. So we're working with Kalamazoo, Michigan, the first pedestrian mall in the country. It failed. We're working with the last pedestrian mall, Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. It failed. And they generally don't work. They work in high tourist areas. You know, Lincoln Road in Miami used to be a street. They turned it into a pedestrian mall, and it immediately failed. It's now come back, and now there's $100 rents. But it went through about a 40-year period of time where rents were $1. And that's how smart I am. I didn't buy anything back
But
when
how about
they were $1.
how about like the certain programming? I'm sure you're familiar with Times Square, which has done their thing where they
Right.
shut it down, and certain programming. Pearl Street in Boulder and other cities are experimenting. Lincoln Road, they shut down the entire road. But what about a specific
There are
block?
certain times, there are certain ways they work. You need high density, you need mass transit, or you need to be a college town. They work in Boulder and Burlington and Santa Monica. There's 6 of them that worked. I know you close your street down for your fashion event and other times, which is fine. That will be the worst sales day for the retailers, but it does work for other reasons, and there's good reasons to do it. So you just have to study it Yes.
So the CBD rules before 2015 didn't allow financial institutions along Atlantic Avenue on the ground floor, and were changed in 2015 and now allow them. Can you talk about what pluses or minuses that has with respect to the retail and restaurant environment?
First floor offices or first floor financial banks and such. I actually invented 25, 30 years ago the policy of requiring retail on ground level. That was my idea. I think. I wasn't the one that invented it. But anyway, I'll take credit for it. But I've changed my mind. I now feel that the ground level should be designed to accommodate retail, should have a high ceiling, lots of glass, and be a storefront. But that if you have office in there, it's okay. And in most cases, you might be an exception to that, but in most cases it's okay. In some cases it's not, but in most cases I think it's okay. And let the market determine. I know here you require retail, but and you might be such a hot market that you should require retail. But most of the towns we work in are struggling, and if it's a real estate office or a bank, that still brings people downtown and it works as an anchor. So I probably shouldn't give you advice here, because what you have is working. You know, what you're doing here works really well. Yes? Go ahead.
A question for you. We have like two markets here. We have Atlantic Avenue, which is one sort of a market, and it's more touristy, impulse buy. And then you come into Pineapple Grove, which is where most of the residents live. It's very residential, high, retail on the ground floor, residences up top, and the surrounding neighborhoods. And so in that grove, there are several shopping centers that kind of cater to the residents more so than it does the tourist feeling on the avenue. And, we're going through some changes and growing changes there. And so we're going to be changing some of our centers. And that's where we go for the floors. The post office, which gives us 500 trips a day and more, when it's a holiday.
Right.
We're going to be changing some of those uses and losing the things that people kind of maybe walk to in exchange for maybe a higher end
Right.
client. And I'm wondering, how important is that post office? How
It's
important are
really-
those uses to walk
To
to?
be a sustainable city, you really have to have a post office. And those are called neighborhood goods and services. I have a hunch, without any factual basis for saying this, is that you probably need a larger grocery store downtown. And I'd like to see you consider that. But you're probably at the point where you actually need a merchandising plan. Where should the grocer go? Where should the restaurants go? Where should the fashion go? Where should the hardware go? Where should the drugstore go? And I know you have a drugstore. But you probably should have an ideal kind of mix of what should go where. Because if you don't try to implement some kind of policy like that, you could end up with all restaurants that can pay, a gazillion dollars for the rent. And that's not sustainable. I think it'd be good for you to find out what you can be and then come up with a strategy. Everybody I met loves the fashion that you have here. You have a wonderful art store. You have a wonderful art galleries. If that's what you really value, you may have to be very direct in saving those. In Charleston, we were called in because they were losing their antiques district. It's the best antiques district in the country, and we had to come up with a strategy to save the antiques district, who couldn't have compete with Saks Fifth Avenue. Somebody else?
I have a question for you. First of all, thank you very much. This has been very enlightening.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. My question is on parking. How do the most successful downtowns handle the parking? Down here, we don't have basements. We can't have underground parking, so we have surface lots that are generally behind or adjacent to the retail. Do the most successful downtowns just not require any parking for the buildings, and they require the owners or the builders of the buildings then to pay into a fund, and then the town manages parking?
Yes. mean, there's whole experts that are better at parking than I do, but in a nutshell, this is the best parking policy that you should have. You should have 2.75 cars per 1,000 square feet of commercial. You should not require on-site parking. You should let them pay in lieu of on-site parking. You should have expensive parking meters, but 2 hours free surface or decks nearby. And that's it. I mean, that does work. And you have to realize that parking is never going to be perfect here. If you made parking perfect, you would look like a mall. You look like the Gardens Mall.
So for structured parking, is there a distance between, is there a limit of how
Mhm. Yeah, they won't walk more than 250 to 300 feet, except office workers. So we actually plan places for workers to park, places for shoppers to park. For example, in the decks, we say no parking on the first level till 10 o'clock. That makes the workers go higher. You know, there's lots of layers of sophistication. This gentleman probably knows better than I. But parking is really important. And, you know, we're in good times now, but I like to plan for the next recession. And I like to plan for when rents go up to 100 a square foot. How are we going to keep that retailer that everybody likes? I mean, it's easy to plan now when the economy is strong, and none of our centers have gone bankrupt because we're always planning for the next recession. What do you do when people don't have to shop? And when a 50% off sale doesn't work?
Thank you.
How important is downtown residential density to most of your retail strategies?
The downtown, you'll never have enough density to support your retail. So, you know, it takes 8,000 houses to support a grocery store, for example. But the downtown residents are necessary for the X factor and for the urbanism. You have to have you have to have buildings with lights on at night. People feel safer. So it's important, but it'll never significantly count for more than 2 or 3% of retail sales, unless you went with super high rises, and you don't want to do that.
Hi, I'm very interested, coming from a retail background, in this almost dropping off a cliff that's going on with some of the national retailers across several categories, but department stores in particular.
Yeah.
And I noticed on your slide you only attributed a small amount of sales to the internet, 9%?
9%.
Is that current?
Yeah,
That is current.
it's 9%, but that's an average. It's 60% in electronics, 70% in books, you know, 2%
So
in jewelry.
you have to know your category.
But as an average, it's 9%. And actually, the internet has been more good than bad because a lot of independent retailers have a worldwide market. So I work in Seaside, Florida. There's a little toy store in Seaside, Florida that tripled its sales with its website.
So in
And
combination, but
it can be good.
I was just wondering about that when it comes to bringing in the chains versus the local small that have been the backbone of Delray.
Yeah.
Granted, we do have urban now. BCBG went in and out.
Right.
But I wondered about whether that should tip your strategy a little more to the local, the concern about increasing internet sales?
That's really that has to be a ground-up decision where you want to set the dial. It's really, I like to say your downtown should provide the goods and services that your community desires and needs. And if that means they like shopping at a dollar store, I think the dollar store is better where you can walk to it than where you have to take a bus or drive to it. You know, that gets me thrown out of the CNU every year when I say that at the conference. They just bar me from the CNU, but, you know, that's my opinion. But it's very personal what a community wants to be. And you need to make that policy decision so that you just, you know, year by year don't lose what you love. You need to really make a decision. My gut feeling is that you are such a strong market that you can set the dial wherever you want to be. I think you're an extraordinarily strong market here. And your urbanism is really amongst the best in the country. That's what everybody's looking for.
I noticed in your video here that you were that video, the presentation that you had sheds for pop-up spaces. I saw shipping containers in there, and I saw pedicabs. Could you comment on those?
I love the pop-up retailers because we incubate new retailers. You know, there's probably 25 people within 5 miles of here that have a great arts and craft or hobby that can't sign a 5-year lease on Atlantic. But if you gave them a space on a month-to-month basis, they might mature into a real bricks and mortar store. And all of my shopping mall developer clients, all my retail clients, my mall clients, are putting in incubator space to grow their own retailers. And then they lock them in, they say you can only go in my mall.
And the shipping containers and the
Shipping
pedicabs?
containers are great. This, you know, the ones where we did some in Brooklyn, they cost $50 a square foot to build, and they get $50 a square foot in rent per month, per year. Shipping containers are great. And you might have some spots where, on your side streets, where you could put some incubator space. I think there's a lot of talent here that would like to start their own little specialty store. It's a lot of fun. And then if you get 15 or 20 of them together, they will be an anchor. And people will drive a long ways just to go and see what's new, what's interesting there.
And then the last one was the pedicabs.
I don't have any experience with those.
It was just in your
Can't help you.
slideshow. It was in the
Yeah,
slideshow,
I
though.
know. I have to punt on that one.
Okay.
I can't help you with that one.
Good try.
Thank you.
Try this one. Thank you again for coming. So you've done a lot of research on Delray, been here a lot. Do you think we could sustain essentially 2 downtowns? Our Congress corridor is the next street that we're trying to really develop. If it, some of it at least turned into that urban downtown, would we be able to sustain that from what you've seen?
Yeah, I think Delray, this is without any research, but I think you could probably be 3 or 4 districts. You could probably have a really strong neighborhood district with the neighborhood goods and services, the dry cleaners and the food markets and bakeries and such, the post office. You probably have a really strong fashion district here, what we call lifestyle goods and services. And it's certainly, you have room for a strong restaurant and entertainment district. I think you could be several. What's hard, what's counterproductive is if those just clash together and kind of you have a little bit of here and a little bit of there. They don't reinforce each other. You really need to have distinct areas to be sustainable. I think you have a lot. I didn't do any research here, but I think you have a lot of options in Delray.
Thank you.
And I love your traffic calming. I love the fact that I had to wait 3 times to go through one signal today. Somebody's doing something right here. Don't tell the traffic engineers that's the case here. They'll fix that problem, but it's really nice.
Any other questions for Mr. Gibbs? Oh. Wait.
What are the telltale signs of inflection points? For example, there's a notion here that the capital markets being what they are, that people are coming into Delray and grossly overpaying for space, and that translates into much higher rents, much higher CAM, much higher taxes, which in and of itself puts a lot of pressure on local retailers more so than food and beverage. I've heard anecdotally that in some of the restaurants, some of the food quality is deteriorating. Hearing that from locals. So you say that you plan for recessions. If you're thinking longer term, what are some of those milestones, inflection points, things that you look for where things just aren't working and you've got to recalibrate?
I think there are real cycles where people overpay for real estate, then they raise the rents to an unsustainable level. When that happens, you tend to get lots of restaurants, and when they can't pay the rent, you get nightclubs. That happened in one city not too far from here, where a third of the main street didn't open till 11:30 at night. And the nightclubs are so bad, they poisoned the residential market, and residential values plummeted. So in Naples, Naples called me back because they hit that point where they were not sustainable anymore, because there were so many restaurants whom paid the high rents that they were taking each other's business away. And then the police really cracked down on drunk driving, and so everybody started eating at the Mercado instead of on Fifth Avenue. And so the telltale sign there was almost every restaurant was offering a dinner for two and a bottle of wine for $18. And that's why we got called in. There are cycles where you're great like you are. Investors from the big cities come in and, like, I'm not going to name their names, but they come in and they overpay thinking you're going to continue to grow. And it can really fizzle out. And the biggest victim is you lose the retailers that you love. You lose that store that's been here for 2 or 3 generations, and they never come back, even when the rents come back down again. And that's why I make a lot of fun at what I do, but it is serious business.
And we're seeing that now, and that's been part of a phase we've been in. And a follow-up to that is part of what you're saying is that we have some element of control over that, whether that's planning, repurposing, zoning. How do we now have a Tommy Bahamas? Did I say that right? Tommy Bahama taking the place of what was a local retailer. That's troubling for a lot of people. But in a capitalist society, what control really do you have over that? Do you say we'd rather have the store vacant? We want the national. How do you? What measures can you put in place
There are actions that you can take. One action is to get the parking and the marketing, get everything like the DDA is doing perfectly aligned so that independent retailer has sales so high that they can pay the high rents. That's one. Bring in a visual merchandising expert and have them help Andy's. Another option is find there are national retailers that you don't know are nationals. The first slide I showed of the Main Street, that's Francisca's. That's a national chain, but you wouldn't know it. But they do they're having sales of $500 a square foot, and they can pay the high rent. So another option is to find out what's supportable, do the market studies, have a merchandising plan, have a story, and hire a Top Gun broker to go out and find the retailers that you want to come into here that can pay the high rents so that you don't have a national chain that you don't like, a national chain that you don't even know is a national chain. You do have options. You don't have to just react. And I have seen cities like this happen in Pasadena. Pasadena became so hot that it's a lot of national chains, and it lost its character, I think. And they didn't react till it was too late. So my big story here is you don't have to just react. You can actually be deliberate in what you do. Find out what you can do. Decide what you want to be. You'll never be 100%, but have a target. Right now you probably don't have a target that you're aiming for. Have a target and then implement it. And if you get 50% there, that's 50% better than you'd be otherwise. But
Last question.
yeah.
In your experience in a town like ours that's so seasonal, and when we're, essentially so under a microscope, where we are attractive to more nationals, when they come across that seasonality and the sales drops in those off months, do you see any kind of pattern where, you know, they don't stay long-term in a seasonal town
No,
like that?
no, that's a good question. In seasonal markets, what happens, because they look at everything by a 12-month, they look at sales per year. If they do a year's worth of sales in 2 months, they're happy. So it's sales per year. That's hard for independent retailers because in the off-season, they don't have headquarters that can send them checks and pay the rent for them. So it's really hard for the independent retailers. And, you know, one thing you could do here is figure out how to dial it up in the off-season. You know, maybe you expand your trade area, and maybe you figure out how to improve sales by 40%. You know, this little town in northern Michigan called Charlevoix, which is as seasonal as it gets, it has about in Michigan we only have about 6 weeks like weather you have here. The rest of the time it snows. And in Charlevoix, during the 6 weeks, they have meters that are expensive. But then off-season, they take them out of the ground. It's free parking. It's really clever. I mean, there are ways that you could become 2 cities. You could, one city for when you're really hot in season, and then another season, and then, you know, completely change your tactic so that these independent retailers have higher sales, and you probably could do that. I think I'm very optimistic about what your options here are. And I'm really delighted that you brought me back here because this is really one of my favorite cities in the whole country. So thank you very much for bringing me here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming. We're really glad you all were here. Have a good night.